right. Hello, everybody. Hello, children. It's Pastor Matthew here for our Children's Praise lesson as we're working through the catechism, the shorter catechism. You guys, I know, have been doing a great job as you've been learning these questions week by week. We do just one question, one time. Now, I know some of these questions are pretty challenging sometimes. And for those of you who are a little younger, maybe you're not getting all of it, but that's okay. If you can even get some of the concepts we're talking about. You're going to learn this stuff over and over again as you grow here at New Life in the church, and you're actually going to build on this knowledge for the rest of your life. So, as a review, we remember this one really fancy word we learned most recently is the word providence. Now, the question about providence was, what is God's providence? And we learned that God's providence is his completely holy, wise, and powerful, preserving and governing all his creatures and their actions. So we'll step back and just say what that is again. We have to remember and we have to review so that we can learn our new question today in question number 12. Providence is God's preserving and governing everything, all the creatures and all of their actions. What's a creature? Everything God made. So God preserves it and he governs it. And we know what that's like. Go back and look at the other video so you can learn what the word preserving and governing means. Very important to remember those terms. But today, with that in our mind, we're going to look at question number 12, you're going to see here, which asks us this very question. What did God's providence specifically do for man whom he created? So now we know what providence is, and now our question is, well, what did God's providence do for us when God first made man in the garden? The answer is this. After the creation, God made a covenant with man to give him life if he perfectly obeyed. God told him to not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, or he would die. So let's repeat that one more time. After the creation, God made a covenant with man to give him life if he perfectly obeyed. God told him not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, or he would die. So that's a pretty simple thing to understand. The two opposite things we have is life and death. And so God made Adam out of the dust of the ground and put them, him particularly, also with Eve, right in the middle of that garden. And it's a garden, so there's lots of beautiful flowers and plants and lots of food to eat. Everything's perfect. It's not like when you go out in the woods right now and you see trees and bushes and shrubs, but it's not very well kept, and some of the bushes maybe are pretty sharp and have jaggers on them or sharp thorns, which is similar to what was put on Jesus' head. It's that image of everything that's not right in the world. But at first, before there was any problems, there was the garden, and inside the garden was Adam and Eve, and everything was really, really good. But also inside the garden, there were two trees. And so I want you to see these two trees. You'll see an image of them here on the screen. There's the tree of life on one side and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil on the other side. So we know that Adam was able to eat from either of these trees at some point, but he chose to do the bad thing, the one thing that God told him not to do, which was to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So I want to read this passage that actually describes this part that our question's talking about. It's from Genesis 2, and we're told in Genesis 2, verse 9, out of the ground the Lord made to spring up every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. That's a garden. God made all the trees come up. And then it says, the tree of life was in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. See? And then, skipping down to verse 15, the Bible tells us that the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to keep it. So Adam's job was to take care of the garden that God made. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, You may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in the day that you eat of it, you will surely die. You would die. So you'll see an image here for life and an image for death. So we have these children that are happy and they're healthy and they're laughing and everything's good. That's being alive. And we know a little bit of that now. But that image for a skull, that's a pretty common image for death. That image means that the person has ceased to live. The insides of our bodies are what we call bones. And an image of a skull is saying that you are no longer who you once were. You've died. You've ceased to exist as you were. So that is the nature of what was going on in the garden. There was life and there was death. And there were two trees, tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. They weren't allowed to eat of that tree, but they did because they wanted to rebel against God. Do you know what it's like when your mom and dad tell you to do something and you say, okay, I guess I'll do it because I have to? Or more particularly, they say, don't do this. Don't do eating cookies before dinner. Don't do something like running around the house with a bouncy ball or something that should be outside, or using a squirt gun indoors, or something that's just not supposed to happen. And your parents say, now don't you do this. And then your little mind, your little heart, you might want to say, but I want to, and why can't I do this? Well, God never gave them a reason why. He just said no. And they said, well, I'm going to do it anyway. That's the same kind of thing, because we wanted to be like God, and sometimes you want to be like your parents, where you get to make all the rules, but you don't get to do that. That's where problems happen. And so life and death, two trees, one tree of life and one tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then we'll learn more about this other word we never talked about. It's a really important word. I'm just going to say it and we'll talk about it some other time. The word covenant. All this is because of a covenant, which simply means promise. So when your teacher asks you, what's a covenant? You say, that's a promise. Okay? And that's question number 12. I will see you again.